Hey, what's up guys? This video is for section 05, which is multiplying and dividing rational numbers. And once again, rational numbers we are looking at today, the rational numbers we're looking at today will be fractions. I know that there's a lot of rational numbers, natural numbers are rational, integers are rational, whole numbers are rational, but we are going to focus with fractions today. So I'm going to show you guys how to multiply fractions first, and then I'm going to show you guys how to divide fractions. So when you guys multiply in fractions, one of the things that you have to remember and memorize is no need for the LCD, lowest common denominator. That is what's different when you multiply fractions versus when you add or subtract fractions. You do not need to find the lowest common denominator. It's very common mistake. Students get confused because they think when you multiply or divide fractions, you need the lowest common denominator. And the answer is no, you do not need the LCD. So what do you do when you multiply fractions? Well, step number one, if you guys can reduce or cross simplify the fractions, so the first fraction, the second fraction, or both fractions, make sure you guys do that. That's going to make your life a lot easier if you guys have smaller numbers. When you reduce fractions, that's what's happened. The numbers will be smaller because you reduce the fraction, and obviously it's going to make your life a lot easier. Step number two, you guys multiply the numerators straight from left to right, and denominators straight from left to right. So you guys don't have to cross multiply, you guys don't have to do anything. You just take the top numbers, numerators, you multiply those, and then you take the bottom, the denominators, and then you multiply those. And number three, always check your signs because we are going to have negative fractions, positive fractions. So you have to follow the steps when you guys multiply or divide fractions. So let's go ahead and look at some examples. So all you do when you look at those fractions, first of all, you have to understand what product or not product, what operation you guys need to do. So here we have a dot in the middle. So we have a fraction 2/5 times, that's the dot in the middle, 1/3. So we have a dot in the middle, we are multiplying those fractions. I do not need the lowest common denominator, but I'm going to check. Can I simplify the fraction 2/5? No. 1/3? No. Can I cross simplify? And this is cross, the 5 and the number across on the top of the other fraction. 5, 1. Well, 5 doesn't go into 1. 1 goes into 5, but that's not going to change anything if you guys divide or reduce by 1. So no, you guys cannot cross simplify. What about the 2 and the 3? No, you guys cannot cross simplify. So all you do when you guys cannot cross simplify, you are going to multiply the numerators. So I'm looking at the top, 2 times 1, that is 2. And then you guys will multiply the denominators, the bottom, 5 times 3, that's going to be 15. You guys can double check if you guys can reduce the fraction right here, 2/15. 2 doesn't go into 15, 15 doesn't go into 2. So they don't have a common a number that you guys can divide by. So that is my answer. My answer is 2/15. The next one, you guys have a negative fraction, 3/7. So we have negative 3/7 times 2/5. So I'm going to check if you guys can cross simplify. 7 and 2, you cannot cross simplify. 3 and 5, you cannot cross simplify. What about this fraction? Nope, 3/7, you cannot cross simplify or reduce, and 2/5, you guys cannot reduce. Now, a big question is, well, we do have a negative on the left side of the fraction. So where does the negative go? So it's very common, and in our class, in Algebra 1 with Mr. Ortega, I want you guys to do this. If you guys have one negative on the left side of the fraction, I want you guys to keep or take that negative to the top number, which means the bottom is going to be positive. So the top is going to be -3 and the bottom is going to be +7. So you guys have to follow the rules when you multiply integers, okay? So I'm going to put the fraction line here. I'm going to multiply the top, -3 times 2, that is -6. when you guys multiply integers, if they have different signs, when you multiply, the answer will be negative. And the bottom, they're both positive. Remember the negative, we took that to the top. So you multiply positive 7 times 5, and that is 35, okay? So this is your answer right here, negative 6 over 35. You guys multiply those numbers. Can you write it as the negative on the left side, as negative, and then 6 over 35? Yeah, you guys can do that, but I'm not too strict with that rule. I don't need that negative on the left side. As long as you have one negative in your fraction, you're good. It's not very common to have the negative on the bottom. It's not incorrect. It's okay to have the negative on the bottom, but it's not very common. So you guys can have it on the top or on the left side of the fraction. So let's do one more here. On the next one, you guys have 1 over 7, 3 over 2, cannot reduce this fraction, cross simplify, nope, cross simplify, nope. So you just multiply the top. So 3 times 1, or 1 times 3, that's going to be 3. And the bottom, 7 times 2 is 14. And that is your answer. So notice that this fraction you cannot reduce, 3 over 14. If you can, you must. You must reduce all fractions. If you can reduce, you have to reduce. Okay? And notice that I never use the lowest common denominator. When you multiply or divide fractions, do not use the LCD. That's only when you add or subtract. Now here, you will be able to cross simplify some of those fractions, okay? Not all 3, but a couple you guys can actually cross simplify. So first you need to understand what operation is happening in those fractions. So you guys already know about the dot in the middle. So that means multiplication. So you're multiplying 1/4 times 2 over 9. Here we have parentheses, but there's nothing in between. Notice, in between there's no plus or minus. So by default, if you don't have any signs, you're multiplying. So you're multiplying negative 3 over 4 times 3 over 8. This one, in between the fraction and the parentheses, you don't have a sign, plus or minus. So you are multiplying, okay? You don't have plus or minus in between. You do have a negative, but that's inside of the parentheses. I'm talking about outside of the parentheses and between the fraction and the parentheses. So you are multiplying. So we're multiplying all of them. So let's go back over here. 1 over 4, you guys cannot reduce. 2 over 9, you guys cannot reduce. But I'm going to look across, okay? Cross simplify. 4 and 2, yes, you guys can reduce the numbers across because you can divide those two numbers by 2. The greatest common, you can say multiple, or the greatest common factor, you can say, but you guys reduce by the biggest number you guys can find. So I know that 2, you guys can divide 4 by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. And you also have to divide that number. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So now you look at the next two numbers, 1 and 9. Nope, you guys cannot reduce. So you guys follow the rules. You multiply the integers. So I'm going to multiply the top. I will multiply 1 times 1. That's 1. I multiply the bottom, 2 times 9. That is 18. And guess what? You guys cannot reduce the fraction. That 1 on top of the fraction, you need it. Yes, in a fraction, if you have a 1 on the top, the numerator, you must keep the 1. If you have a 1 on the bottom, denominator, you don't need it. You just can erase, or you don't worry about the 1 on the bottom. But the 1 on the top, you have to keep. So let's move on to the next one here. So you guys do have a negative. Remember that negative is going to go to the top of the fraction. So I'm going to circle this right here and move that to the top. So I know I have a negative 3 on the top. The bottom is going to be positive. So negative 3, negative goes to the top, and the bottom is positive. Now, you might be thinking, oh, the numbers on the bottom, I can reduce. I can divide by 4. That's the biggest number. Can you divide by 2? Yeah, but that's not the greatest number. 4 is. 4 is bigger than 2. So you can divide 4 by 4 and you can divide 8 by 4. But you cannot reduce the fractions, because you cannot reduce the bottom like this when you guys go horizontally from left to right. you guys cannot reduce that way. It has to be cross or across, okay? Bottom and top. Bottom and top. So look at the threes. You might be thinking, oh, I can reduce those numbers. You cannot. You have to look at the numbers across. I'm going to jump to the next one, okay? I'm going to come back to this one, but let me show you guys the next one. You see that 15 and you see that 5? Those numbers you can cross simplify. They're across from each other. One's on the bottom, one's on the top. So you guys can actually simplify. You can divide by 5, both of them. Here, across, you can also divide 4 and 2. So this one, yes, you can cross simplify, but not this one. The only thing you can do is just multiply the two fractions. So I'm going to multiply the top, negative 3 times 3. That's going to be negative 9. Remember, the negative went to the top. And the bottom, you guys will have 4 times 8. That's going to be 32. So my answer is negative 9 over 32. You guys cannot reduce. You keep it as a fraction. So the next one, remember that I mentioned that you guys can cross simplify. You guys can cross simplify. So let's do that. I'm going to start with the 15 and the 5. 15 can be divided by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. And you can reduce 5 by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. So I turn this into a 1. Now remember that negative goes to the top number. So that 1 is going to be a negative. Now, if you guys look at the 4 and the 2, you can also cross simplify. You can divide by 2. So 4 divided by 2, that is 2. And 2 divided by 2, that is going to be 1. So now I multiply. Remember that you multiply the numbers on the top. 2 times negative 1. Be careful with the signs. Always check your signs. Positive 2 times negative 1. That's going to be a negative 2. And the bottom, 3 times 1, well, that's going to be 3. So my answer is negative 2 over 3. I cannot reduce the fraction, so that's the answer. So we are going to move on to dividing fractions, but the first thing you have to remember is what is the reciprocal of a fraction. The mathematical term is the multiplicative inverse, but that's too complicated to pronounce, guys. Okay, so you guys can say reciprocal, and you guys are used to that word from junior high and elementary. They use the word reciprocal, but like I said, mathematically, it is called the multiplicative inverse. Inverse means opposite. That's the word, opposite. Okay, so when you think about the reciprocal, that's what we're looking at. We're kind of looking at the opposite. So if you look at this fraction here, 3 over 7. The top number is 3, the bottom number is 7. So if you think about the opposites, so the opposite of top is bottom, and the opposite of bottom is top, that's when you switch. You guys have the fraction backwards. That is the reciprocal or multiplicative inverse. I'm just going to say reciprocal. It's a little bit easier, okay? So the reciprocal of 3 over 7 is 7 over 3. You can also go backwards. The reciprocal of 7 over 3 is 3 over 7. So you guys flip the fraction upside down, okay? Kind of like the opposite. If you guys have a negative fraction, negative 5 over 2, the reciprocal, and you have to pay attention to what I'm saying. I am saying the reciprocal of the fraction is negative 2 over 5. So let's think about this. First of all, the sign. You notice the negative stays here. You keep the negative. So when I say the reciprocal of the fraction, you keep the negative, you keep the sign. That's why over here I didn't change the sign. This is a positive fraction, that's a positive fraction. So you keep the sign, but you guys have to turn the fraction upside down. So 2 goes on the top, 5 goes on the bottom, okay? So the reciprocal of negative 5 over 2 is negative 2 over 5, or you guys can go backwards. The reciprocal of negative 2 over 5 is negative 5 over 2. Now, if a teacher or myself, we ask, what is the opposite reciprocal? Opposite reciprocal, that's when you change the sign. Opposite means change the sign. What is the opposite reciprocal? Oh, you change it to a positive. If it's negative, you change it to a positive. But we're not using the opposite reciprocal. We are just using the reciprocal. So keep the sign when you guys are dividing fractions. And just to emphasize a little bit more on reciprocals, I'm just going to write down what the reciprocals are for these two fractions. So 7 over 9, the reciprocal is 9 over 7. You just switch you turn the fraction upside down. And for the next one, negative 2 over 5, well, first of all, I keep the negative because it says reciprocal. Okay, it doesn't say opposite, it's just reciprocal. Keep the negative and you turn the fraction the other way. So negative 5 over 2. So those are the reciprocals of the fractions. Now that you remember and you know what is the reciprocal, let's go ahead and look at how to divide fractions. So dividing fractions, first of all, same thing as multiplication. When you multiply fractions, you do not need, no need for the LCD. You do not need to look for the lowest common denominator, okay? This is when you multiply or divide. You do not need the LCD. If you guys are adding or subtracting, yes, you need the lowest common denominator. But right now, you do not need it because we're dividing. So number one, when you guys are dividing fractions, you need to multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So let me underline and circle a few things, okay? First of all, you are going to multiply. Multiply by what? By the reciprocal of the second fraction, which means the division sign will change to multiplication, and the second fraction, you need to turn it around, upside down, the reciprocal, okay? So you guys multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. After you do step number one, you guys, so you set this up, you set it up, multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. Step number two, simplify if you can. And step number three, always check your signs. Remember that we do have negatives, positives, so you have to check your signs and follow the rules for multiplying the integers, okay? So let's look at some examples. So the first thing, when you look at those fractions, I need to know what I'm doing. So notice that in between I do have the division sign. Here I also have division sign, and this one also has division sign. So you actually are dividing, okay? It's not like multiplication. If you don't have anything in between, you multiply. Well, this one you have something in between. You have a division, so you have to divide. So you're going to multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So that's the first thing. Step number one. I am going to set it up. I'm going to keep the first fraction. So notice 1 over 3. I'm going to change this to multiplication. So I'm going to put a times, the little dot. We don't use the x anymore because we do have variables that are x's. So we don't want students to get confused with the variable x, the letter x, and the multiplication sign x. So that's from elementary. You guys use like a little x to multiply. Well, here we use a dot. Okay, so dot means multiplication. Now I'm going to write the reciprocal of 1/2. And the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. So guess what? Now this becomes like a regular multiplication. You just multiply the two fractions. So when you multiply, check if you can simplify, if you can cross simplify, simplify, cross simplify. So I cannot do anything here. So I just multiply the top numerator. 1 times 2 is 2. And the bottom, 3 times 1 is 3. I cannot reduce the fraction, so that's my answer, 2 over 3. Now the next one, you guys have a whole number. 4 divided by negative. There's a negative 2 over 7. So first of all, when you guys multiply, when you guys divide, when you guys add or subtract fractions, everything has to be a fraction. This 4 is not a fraction. So I need to make it a fraction. I put a 1 under the 4. That's how you make a whole number a fraction. Just put a 1 under. I'm going to change the division to multiplication, and I'm going to use the reciprocal of the second fraction. So here, I keep the first fraction, 4 over 1. Notice the 1's on the bottom. Change that to times the division. And the reciprocal, I'm going to use parentheses, negative 7 over 2. Notice that I didn't change the sign. I am not using the opposite reciprocal, not the opposite. You keep the sign, just the reciprocal. Now I'm going to check. I can cross simplify the 4 and the 2. Yes, I can. So I'm going to cross simplify. 2 goes into 4 2 times. 2 goes into 2 1 time. The negative, remember, that goes to the top number, okay? So the bottom will stay positive. So I'm going to multiply the top. 2 times negative 7, that's negative 14, over, and on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. Now, for the answer, you guys, if you have a 1 on the bottom, you don't need it, okay? You don't need it. So you can just put a negative 14 for your answer. That is sufficient. That's enough, okay? That's it. That's your answer. The next one, you have 2 parentheses, but notice what we have in between. Division. So you really need to change the sign, multiplication, and use the reciprocal of the second fraction. Keep the parentheses. So I am going to keep the first parentheses, negative 4 over 3. I'm going to multiply times, and the second fraction, reciprocal, negative 3 over 2. Notice that I'm using the same sign, okay? I keep the sign because it's just a reciprocal. So keep the sign. I can cross simplify 4 and 2, and also 3 and 3. Notice that we do have 2 negatives. Now you already know this. I gave you guys a tip in class, and I'll say it right now. If you are multiplying or dividing, and you guys have even number of negatives, 2 is even, 4 is even, 6, 8, 10. If you guys have even number of negatives, your answer will be positive when you multiply or divide. If you guys have odd number of negatives, so 1 negative or 3 negatives or 5 negatives, 7, 9, those are odd, then your answer will be negative if you have odd number of negatives. Right now I have even number, 2 negatives. I'm multiplying negative times a negative. That's going to be positive. So right away I know my answer will be positive, but I'm going to cross simplify. So I'm going to cross simplify the 3's first. So 3 goes into 3 one time. Turn this into 1 time. 2. Now let's go to the 2 and 4. So 2 goes into 4 2 times, and 2 goes into 2 1 time. Remember, the negative goes to the top number. Okay, so you take that negative to the top, take this one to the top. So when I multiply the top, negative 2 times negative 1, that's positive 2. And the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. So I know it's a little bit hard to see, but there's a negative. So negative 2 times negative 1. Remember, we reduce. So negative 2 times negative 1. That's positive 2. And the bottom, 1 times 1. 1 times 1 is 1. You don't need that 1 on the bottom, so you guys can get rid of that. So my answer is just positive 2 right here. So the next thing I want to show you guys is how to use Desmos. There's a free app, okay, or a scientific calculator. You guys can also try this with the scientific calculator. But I'm going to show you guys Desmos.com so you guys can multiply or divide fractions. So let me get that running. So using Desmos or a scientific calculator, and you guys are dividing fractions, you don't really need to change the second fraction and multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, so you don't need to do that step. You guys can just put the fractions in your calculator, scientific calculator, with the division sign, and the calculator will actually do the work for you. So I'm going to do that in Desmos. I'm going to put the fraction, and to put the fraction, you just use the division sign. So I'm going to put 1 divided by 3. Okay, I need to move the cursor, so there's some arrows on the right side of the screen here, and I move the cursor to the right. I'm going to put division, and then I have 1 divided by 2. Okay, now notice that Desmos, they actually set up the fractions a little bit weird. There's a fraction on the top and there's a fraction on the bottom. The way you guys can change that is by using parentheses. It's okay to use parentheses. So I'm going to delete what I have on the screen in Desmos, and I'm going to use parentheses 1 divided by 3. I'm going to move the cursor, close parentheses, and I'm going to put a division sign, okay? So this one makes it a little bit more clear of how the fractions look like. And then you guys use parentheses again, 1 divided by 2. And I'm going to close the parentheses. So in parentheses, you see the top 1/3, on the bottom 1/2. Now, we have a rational number, decimal. I don't want the decimal. I'm going to change the fraction. Notice that I'm clicking on the blue rectangle. There's boxes. Right now, they're white. I'm going to click on them, and they're blue right now. Click on them, and they're white right now. So you guys can turn those answers into fractions. 2 over 3. Okay, you guys can do that. You don't have to set up your calculator when you multiply by the reciprocal. You just use division sign and you guys get it. Can you guys multiply fractions? You can. I'm going to make something up right now. You can multiply 2 over 7. I'm going to have my times in between. So there's a times. There's a dot in the middle. And I'm going to multiply by 1 over 2. Okay, so notice. You guys have that answer. I'm going to turn it into a fraction. 1/7. Okay, I'm going to turn it into a decimal. Fraction right there. So you guys can multiply fractions using decimals. You guys can divide fractions. I'm going to do the next one because the next one, remember, we had a whole number, 4. So in decimals, you don't have to even turn that into a whole number. I mean, into a fraction. You just put it as 4 divided by, you guys can use your parentheses, negative, don't forget the negative, 2 over 7. And you close parentheses. And that's my answer. Negative 14. And I'm going to try the next one for you guys too. I have 2 parentheses, so I open parentheses, negative 4 over 3. You close the parentheses, divided by, and then you guys have open parentheses, negative 2 over 3. And then you guys close parentheses, okay? And the answer is 2. So with decimals, it's a very good tool to use when you guys want to add, subtract, multiply, or divide fractions. You guys can use this free website. There's a free app you guys can download on your phone. You guys can use a scientific calculator. Okay, it's a little bit easier, decimals, to see what you guys are typing. Just make sure that you guys type the problem correctly in decimals, because if you miss something or you guys put something wrong, you're gonna get a wrong answer. So it's a very good idea for you guys to check. I'm gonna just show you guys one more. I'm going to multiply, okay? I'm going to multiply 3 over 5 times, just to show you guys multiplying fractions. And I'm going to multiply by 7 over 9, okay? So notice there's the decimal, and I change that to fractions, 7 over 15. So you guys can change back to decimal. In Algebra 1, Algebra 2, we ask for fractions, not decimals, okay? So when you guys are adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing fractions, we want the answers in a fraction mode. Alright guys, so that's the end of this video. If you guys like my videos, you guys can click that like button, and you guys can also subscribe to my channel so you guys can know when I have new videos coming up, and turn on your notifications so you guys are aware of my new videos. So make sure you guys practice, and I'll see you guys later.